Whether you're a veteran of the grimdark future or you were just exposed to 40k for the first time through Space Marine 2, after playing it, you've probably got a lot of questions. What exactly is a Space Marine and why are they twice as tall as everybody else? What is a Tyranid? Who are the Thousand Sons and what do they want? Who's this God Emperor that everybody keeps talking about? And what the hell is up with those weird floating cyborg babies in cages? Well, in this video, we're going to be getting into all that and a whole lot more, as I'm going to be answering all of the questions that new players tend to ask. If you couldn't tell, Warhammer 40,000 is by far my favorite franchise of all time. I've been reading its stories for about 20 years now, and I find its lore deeply fascinating. Bloody, dark, and in many cases pretty disturbing, but fascinating nonetheless. Space Marine 2 has over 30 years worth of lore that went into its development, which for a lot of people can be pretty overwhelming. But don't worry, I'm going to break it all down into smaller pieces and just tell you what you need to know. Oh yeah, and if any of the factions or characters in this video pique your interest, I've made a bunch of deep dives on many of them that will be linked in the description down below. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into the grimdark. What is a Space Marine? The Space Marines, also known as the Adeptus Astartes or the Emperor's Angels of Death, are one of the most elite and feared fighting forces within the Imperium of Man, a galaxy-spanning empire containing an estimated billion worlds and a population in the quintillions. The aspirants that are chosen to become Space Marines are all male, between the ages of 5 and 14. And although every Space Marine chapter has different criteria for their aspirants, most choose boys for their brutality, willpower, and innate propensity for violence. The trials that these boys are going to have to face are ludicrously dangerous, often involving them being thrown into incredibly hostile environments alone with minimal supplies where they'll be forced to survive for months or even years at a time. Unfortunately, around 90% of them will not survive the attempt, but those that do will be accepted into the chapter as a neophyte and begin the process of being elevated into a transhuman super soldier, a living weapon designed to fight in endless wars against the horrors of an uncaring galaxy. This process combines advanced genetic engineering, a copious amount of psycho-indoctrination, and a series of brutal invasive surgeries. Not only are the Space Marines engineered to be bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, more resilient, and longer-lived than ordinary humans, but they're also gifted with a series of 19 to 22 different implants that each grant their recipient a host of powerful abilities. The Belcher's gland, for example, my personal favorite organ, which now I say that out loud is kind of weird to have a favorite organ, but anyways, this is an implant that goes in the Space Marine's mouth and, when activated, causes his saliva to take on an acidic quality. This can be spit like a weapon, but is more commonly used as a utility tool to disintegrate obstacles. The Laramin's organ is placed in their chest, and when grievous damage is detected, it unleashes Laramin cells into the Marine's bloodstream. When exposed to air, they rapidly develop into scar tissue to stop bleeding. Other organs include a second heart, a third lung, a node that allows them to go weeks without sleep, and even one that allows them to gain the memories of their enemies by consuming a portion of their flesh. It's estimated that there were around 1,000 different Space Marine chapters, each with their own unique culture, heritage, and methods of conducting war. The majority of these chapters are what we refer to as Codex compliant, meaning they follow the teachings of the Codex Astartes and thus are made up of 1,000 Marines, broken up into 10 companies of 100 men each. In Space Marine 2, we take control of Astartes from the second company of the UltraMarines chapter. Although Space Marines are designed to exist in their armor for long periods of time and can go weeks without food, water, or even rest, as their armor has recycle systems built into it, they're fully capable of taking it off, and normally do not wear it during downtime, unless they're in an active war zone. Although less common in the 41st millennium where there is only war, Space Marines in their downtime often do have their own unique hobbies. Chapters like the Blood Angels and the Angels Resplendent, for example, highly value the creation of art, and the Space Wolves are really into drinking. Fun fact about that, Space Marines under normal circumstances can't get drunk, as their advanced organs filter out the toxins almost immediately. So the Space Wolves invented their own type of alcohol called Mjord that not only would get them drunk, but a single sip would kill an adult human male. It's that potent. Space Marines from every chapter are also known to play a board game known as Regicide, which is kinda like the in-universe equivalent to the 40k tabletop game. This wargame allows them to take on the role of a Primarch, commanding forces on the battlefield, wherein they can blow off some steam and try out different tactics and stratagems before attempting to utilize them in real battle. But before we go any further, if you're a fan of Captain Titus, and yes, I know he's technically a lieutenant now, but he'll always be Captain Titus to me. The legend himself just recently got added as a playable character in Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, the sponsor of this video. If you haven't already started playing Tacticus yet, you're missing out, as the game is both free to play and an absolute blast. It has over 70 legendary Warhammer 40,000 champions to collect and battle with, split across 16 playable factions, with more getting added all of the time. I've spoken to the devs on multiple occasions, and it's clear to me that this game was made by people who are passionate about Warhammer. From each champion's lore-accurate abilities to their art style that looks like they came right out of the tabletop game. Everything about Tacticus is dripping with that grimdark flavor that we all know and love. Tacticus features fast-paced, brutal skirmishes that are easy to pick up and play but challenging to master. And it's absolutely chock full of content. There's an onslaught mode, salvage runs, guild raids, PvP arena battles, multiple faction-specific campaigns, and special events going on all of the time. If you haven't played in a while, Tacticus has changed a lot since it first launched. So whether you're a veteran or a newcomer, now is the perfect time to start playing the game. Click on my link in the description of this video to download Tacticus for free today. Big thanks to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring this video. Why are Space Marines so much taller than everybody else? Now, I know it's pretty dark that all Space Marines are taken when they're young boys and thus are kinda sorta child soldiers, but the main reason why prepubescent boys make for better candidates is that their bodies are still developing. This means there's a much lower chance of their bodies rejecting all of the organs and implants they're going to receive. Speaking of which, the very first of those implants cause their bodies to start developing in a very specific way that maximizes their combat potential. Their bones will grow larger and more dense, their muscles will develop far past what is naturally obtainable, and their rib cage will even fuse into a solid bulletproof plate. The end result is that the Space Marine will be much larger and stronger than a baseline human, and on average they stand between 6'8" and 7.5 feet tall. However, that's just the original Space Marines that we refer to as Firstborn. The Primaris Marines, which were introduced to the franchise not too long ago, are even bigger, normally standing at around 8 feet tall, but there have been some that have been upwards of 9 feet tall, though this is considered rare. What are Primaris Marines? Whereas the blueprints to create the original Space Marines were designed by the Emperor of Mankind himself, the Primaris Marines are an improvement upon those original plans made by Belisarius Cawl, an Archmagos of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Not only are the Primaris Marines larger than their Firstborn counterparts, but they also received 3 additional implants during their creation. The sinew coils, which add coiled durametallic cybernetic muscle fibers to the Marine's anatomy, dramatically increasing their strength. The Belisarian furnace that will keep them alive in periods of extreme stress or trauma by injecting them with an ocean of combat stems. And finally, the Magnificat that works in combination with the organs designed to accelerate their growth and push it even further than the God Emperor intended. Although the adoption of the Primaris Marines was not without its hurdles, at this point in the timeline, the majority of Space Marines being produced are Primaris. And likewise, Firstborn Marines can undergo a procedure to turn them into a Primaris Marine, a process often referred to as crossing the Rubicon. A chapter can have a mix of Firstborn and Primaris within their ranks, as some choose to cross the Rubicon and others do not for their own reasons. At first, this procedure was said to be incredibly risky, with a high rate of complications. But over time, most of those have been worked out, and now it's considered something of a taboo if a Space Marine of notable rank chooses not to become a Primaris. Even still, at the end of the day, it's their own decision, with the exception of life or death circumstances where the Marine may not be conscious to give their consent, such as what happened with Titus at the end of the game's prologue. Who are the UltraMarines? Out of all of the Space Marine chapters, it is probably the UltraMarines that are the most famous and revered. They have produced more legendary Space Marine heroes than any other chapter, have a long history of conquering worlds and molding them into loyal, thriving star systems. They're also a founding chapter, meaning that they're one of the oldest in existence, and their gene seed is noted for being particularly pure and less prone to corruption or mutation than the gene seed of any other chapter. However, the largest reason for their fame is the fact that they follow the Codex Astartes more closely than anyone else, having only ever deviated from its teachings once to create the Tyrannic war veterans. If you're unfamiliar with the Codex Astartes, it's basically a tactical doctrine written by their Primarch Rubric that lays out how a Space Marine chapter should be organized. In addition to this, it's full of concentrated wisdom and tactical experience from not only the Primarch, but hundreds of venerated generals, tacticians, and war heroes of the past. So revered is this document that many consider it to be a Space Marine holy book sanctioned by the God Emperor himself. Whereas many chapters may only have a single homeworld to call their own, the Ultramarines hail from the realm of Ultramar, a sub-empire consisting of 500 unique worlds. They value courage and honor above all else, and see duty as sacred. Whereas some chapters are famed for their aggression or their affinity for a particular type of warfare, the Ultramarines are level-headed, calculating, and deeply analytical, and famed for their brilliant tactical minds. They are trained to not only be warriors, but also statesmen, ambassadors, and diplomats. They display a balanced and adaptable approach to warfare, and are one of the most disciplined and efficient fighting forces within the entire Imperium. Despite the fact that the Ultramarines are the main characters in the Space Marine series, many of us were shocked to see that in the opening of the game, it wasn't the Ultramarines that was featured. It was a completely different chapter known as the Deathwatch. So what are these guys all about? Who are the Deathwatch? The Deathwatch is one of the most unique chapters of Space Marines, and that's for a couple of different reasons. The first is that none of its members have a shared genetic history. Instead, every member of this chapter is an honored veteran from a different one that has been chosen to serve a tour of duty with them. The second major difference is that they serve as the Chamber Militant for a completely different organization known as the Inquisition, which you can think of as the secret police of the Imperium, said to have supreme authority sanctioned by the Emperor himself. The Inquisition is broken up into what are known as Ordos, and each Ordo specializes in combating a different threat to the Imperium. Ordo Xenos, one of the largest Ordos, is dedicated to the detection and eradication of aliens. It is this Ordo that the Deathwatch has taken a sacred vow to serve when their legendary alien hunting skills are needed. Now, during their time within the Deathwatch, a Space Marine will be forced to fight alongside members of every other chapter, which in turn gains them valuable experience and insight from their new brothers that they can subsequently take back to their original chapter after their tour ends. However, they must swear an oath of secrecy to never reveal the Deathwatch's inner workings or any of the classified information that they will be privy to during their service. Although the Deathwatch serves all over the galaxy, each portion operating out of what is known as a watch station, they are perhaps most famously associated with an area of space known as Jericho's Reach, a vast war-torn sector located on the Imperium's fringes that, although once controlled by humanity, has since fallen into darkness and chaos. You can tell which Space Marines have served a tour with the Deathwatch because of a unique shoulder pauldron they're permitted to wear after their vigil ends. This pauldron, however, is optional, and some Space Marines may choose not to wear it, especially if you're someone like Dimitri and Titus that may not look too fondly on this period of time where he was serving penance as a Blackshield. What is a Blackshield? Now, normally it is a huge honor for a Space Marine to serve within the Deathwatch, and when they do, they will paint their armor black, but importantly, they will leave their chapter heraldry and icons intact, as removing them would be an act of dishonor. However, sometimes a Space Marine will show up on the Deathwatch's door with unpainted armor and no chapter markings, all of their own accord and not through the traditional channels. This can happen for a lot of different reasons. They may be the last surviving member of their chapter that was wiped out. Their chapter may have fallen to chaos and they view their chapter's colors as shameful. Or they may have been cast out of their chapter for committing some type of crime that their brothers deem unforgivable. Individuals that seek to join the Deathwatch under these or similar circumstances will be permitted to do so as a Blackshield. Now, some may question the Deathwatch's decision to give these Marines a new home, but from their perspective, regardless of what they may or may not have done to end up in this position, a Space Marine is far too valuable a tool to simply throw away. And if they wish to continue to fight in the name of mankind, then the Deathwatch is more than willing to point them in the direction of something that needs to be killed. A Blackshield's past is never questioned, and all records of their existence will be scrubbed from their former chapter's history. From this point forward, they will spend the rest of their lives seeking atonement by protecting mankind from the alien menace in the darkest portions of the Emperor's Imperium. Readmittance into their original chapter is exceedingly rare, though not explicitly unheard of, as demonstrated by Titus after the game's prologue. During your time playing Space Marine 2, you're gonna hear the names of certain legendary individuals come up pretty frequently, the big three being the Emperor, the Primarch, and the Chapter Master. So let's get into them. Who is the Emperor? Now, the God Emperor, also referred to as the Master of Mankind, is the supreme ruler and deity worshipped by the Imperium of Man. He is the most powerful human psyker to have ever lived and was the guiding force behind the creation of the Imperium, the Space Marine legions, the Primarchs, and the Custodians. It was he who reunited the fractured planet of Earth after the downfall of human civilization in the Age of Strife. It was he who taught humanity that the stars were theirs by birthright, and it was he who reunited all of the lost human worlds during the Great Crusade. It was the Emperor's plan to build a thriving utopia for mankind, a secular society that put its faith in science and not false gods. However, half of his Primarch sons and their associated legions would become corrupted by chaos and turn against him in an event known as the Horus Heresy. This event would see the Emperor end up getting mortally wounded and entombed upon the Golden Throne, where he would remain for the next 10,000 years. By the time of the 41st millennium, he is practically a rotting corpse, kept alive through the sacrifice of 1,000 psykers every day. He is the carrion master of humanity, writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. Many believe that the Emperor, even in his deathless state, still watches over mankind and protects the faithful. That though his physical body may be locked to the throne, his spiritual one has been growing stronger in the warp each and every day. There, he has been locked in eternal conflict with the Chaos Gods and holds back the tides of chaos. Though in his life he denied claims of his divinity, at this point, many believe that he truly has become a god, and that one day he will rise from his throne and lead mankind once again. What is the Primarch, and who is Rubric Guilliman? For as powerful as the Emperor was, he knew in order to unite the galaxy during the Great Crusade, he was going to need armies. Thus, he created the original 20 Space Marine legions and 20 powerful generals to lead them. These beings were known as the Primarchs, each one a veritable demigod, blessed with a portion of the Emperor's power and personality. If a Space Marine is bigger, faster, stronger, and smarter than a baseline human, then a Primarch is that but to the Space Marines, but also on a totally different level. On average, they stood about 12 feet tall, and were each gifted with their own personality and unique set of superhuman abilities. Magnus the Red, who was the Primarch of the Thousand Suns, the chaos enemy faced in Space Marine 2, was one of the most powerful psykers to have ever lived, is second only to the Emperor himself, while Rubric Guilliman, Primarch of the UltraMarines, was gifted with supernatural intellect and godlike tactical insight. For the longest time in 40k's history, the Primarchs were the subject of myth and legend, individuals that played an important role in Imperial history, but nobody had seen any of them for thousands of years. They either ended up getting killed or all disappeared at various points for different reasons. However, that all changed when Guilliman was resurrected and returned to the Imperium at the end of the 41st millennium, declaring himself its Lord Commander and the Imperial Regent, meaning that aside from the Emperor, he right now is the single most powerful man currently in existence. As Guilliman has taken it upon himself to lead not only his sons, but the entire Imperium, control of the Ultramarines is still firmly in the hands of their chapter master, Marneus Calgar. Who is Marneus Calgar? Okay, Marneus Calgar is easily one of the most legendary Space Marines to have ever existed, and he's the epitome of what it means to be an Ultramarine, both a fusion of martial excellence and strategic brilliance. He is a brilliant commander, honed by centuries of battlefield experience. But the fortress of knowledge that is Calgar's mind extends well past simply commanding armies. He is seen as a visionary leader who has a deep understanding of the Imperium's vast logistical needs, and thus he is also a statesman of incredible influence. Okay, so get this. Inside of the Ultramarines headquarters, which is known as the Fortress of Hera, can be found ancient records dating back thousands of years that catalog the achievements and heroic deeds of Ultramarines of the past. Now, simply having a single entry in these archives is a considerable achievement of note, yet there have been some heroes that accomplish more. Some left behind records multiple pages long, others left behind entire tomes of honorable deeds and great victories. But Marneus Calgar? This dude has 28 full volumes dedicated to his accomplishments, and his legacy is still being written. He led the assault on Behemoth Primus, a Tyranid hive ship during the Battle of Macragge. He He defeated an avatar of Cain single-handedly in melee combat. He slayed the Swarmlord, one of the most powerful Tyranid bioforms in existence at the Battle of Ikar IV. And he survived a Night Lord's ambush that caused him to crash land on a backwater world. He then subsequently took the planet's primitive population and molded them into a disciplined fighting force that was capable of defeating an army of Chaos Space Marines. It was also Calgar that volunteered to be the first test subject when it came to crossing the Rubicon. You see, at the time, the procedure to turn a firstborn into a Primaris was incredibly risky, but Calgar would never ask his brothers to do something that he wouldn't do himself. Now thankfully, the surgery did prove to be a success, and now Calgar as a Primaris Marine is even bigger, faster, and stronger than he was before. There isn't an Ultramarine alive that does not have an enormous amount of respect for their chapter master, as he is one of the greatest heroes the Imperium has ever produced. What is a Space Marine Chaplain? The Chaplains are some of the most honored and revered Space Marines within any given chapter, as it is they who are appointed to minister to the mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of their brothers. You can think of these guys like Space Marine Battle Priest, each one a mighty and fearsome warrior in their own right, but also an awe-inspiring presence that compels those who witness them to acts of great bravery and devotion. However, as a friend of mine recently pointed out, if the Space Marines are child soldiers, then you can think of a chaplain as kinda like their guidance counselor. Although it's true that the chaplains command a lot of respect from their brothers, these men are also aware that it is the chaplain that is constantly monitoring them for weakness, a lack of faith, or worse, corruption. This judgment is a process that begins the moment the aspirant is accepted into the chapter and will last until their death. Throughout the course of their career, the chaplain will guide these young men and teach them of their chapter's culture, philosophy, and end up instilling in them the wisdom of their Primarch. Thus, the chaplains are both teachers and judges, spiritual leaders and battle-hardened warriors. The chaplains believe that only through unshakable faith can a Space Marine stand firm against the darkness. And fun fact about the masks they wear, this skull is meant to represent the face of the Emperor. For their brothers, when the chaplain's eyes fall upon them, it is as if the Emperor himself is judging their deeds and witnessing their victories. But to the enemies of mankind, they must look into the Emperor's face as the chaplain delivers his divine wrath. What is a Dreadnought? Dreadnoughts are easily some of the most iconic war machines in all of Warhammer, as they perfectly embody what the grimdark essence of 40k is all about. They are a combination war machine life support system, an armored military iron lung, piloted by a critically wounded Space Marine that is deemed too valuable to let die. Through entombment within a Dreadnought, these individuals have been blessed, or some would say cursed, to continue serving the Emperor even in death. Though we do not have an exact confirmation on how old a Space Marine can naturally get, most of them have a life expectancy of around a couple hundred years. Some Dreadnoughts, on the other hand, are beyond ancient. Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, for example, fought during the Horus Heresy, and thus is over 11,000 years old. Most Dreadnoughts are kept asleep between combat engagements, though some are permitted to stay conscious in order to offer guidance and wisdom to their younger brothers. However, the longer somebody stays interred within one of these things, the more their sanity begins to fracture. They will never again feel the touch of another, the wind of distant battlefields against their face, the feeling of a bolter kicking in their hand, and they will never again view anything with their own eyes. Instead, having to rely upon the Dreadnought's visual and auditory feeds. For a Space Marine that was designed solely for war, this is a miserable existence. There are tons of different types of Dreadnoughts: Assault Pattern Dreadnoughts, Contemptor Pattern Dreadnoughts, the Deradio Dreadnoughts, and my personal favorite, the absolutely massive Leviathan Pattern Siege Dreadnoughts. Now, the ones that we see in Space Marine 2, however, are a relatively new type of Dreadnought introduced alongside the Primaris Marines. These are Primaris Redemptor Pattern Dreadnoughts. Now, as is tradition with most things Primaris, they are bigger, faster, and stronger than their predecessors. But here, this comes with a pretty massive trade-off. You see, these Dreadnoughts have a tendency to burn out their pilots, reducing them to a collection of charred organs in only a couple of centuries. Although this may seem pretty grim, for those who know what the curse of being inside of a Dreadnought is really like, this shortened lifespan may actually be a blessing in disguise. They're allowed to continue to serve the Emperor in their chapter past the point that they should have died, but will still ultimately be allowed to rest, for only in death does duty end. What are those creepy flying babies? Okay, I think we beat around the bush long enough. What the hell is going on with the babies? I'm going to assume that this was a lot of people's first what the fuck moment in Space Marine 2, as I could just imagine you're walking around the battle barge, looking at everything, taking it all in, and you think 40k seems really cool, and then you see a bunch of cages full of flying babies.
What the hell is even that?
Now these creepy little dudes are known as cherubim, and in order to understand what they are, we need to know what a servitor is. And you'll see those dudes shuffling around the battle barge as well, or sometimes fused to walls in the Mechanicus facilities halfway through the game. A servitor is a class of cyborg servant created by the Adeptus Mechanicus by fusing a lobotomized human thrall with mechanical augmentations and copious amounts of life-preserving chemicals that keep them from rotting. This is done because the Imperium has a deep mistrust of artificial intelligence, or abominable intelligence as they call it. This is completely outlawed, and the closest they're willing to get to this are cyborgs that are technically still powered by an intact human brain. Most servitors are capable of following and understanding basic commands, and are about as intelligent as a toddler or a really smart Labrador. Most of the individuals chosen to become a servitor are criminals, murderers, or heretics that were on death row. But in a twist, instead of being executed, they were chosen to pay penance for their sins forevermore as a servitor. As far as the Imperium can tell, servitors have no memory of who they were before or what is going on around them. They're still technically alive, but everything that made them a person is just no longer in there. However, there have been a few horrifying accounts of this not exactly being the case, but that's a grim topic for a different video. Now, thankfully, when it comes to the cherubim, they were never people to begin with. They're not real babies. All of the organic components used in their construction are vat-grown in Mechanicus-controlled laboratories, and it's not even really flesh the way we would think of it, and more like an organic, vaguely fleshy wax-like substance. These parts are combined with mechanical components and formed into the shape of a genderless child. They are then fitted with a set of decorative augmetic wings and a grav generator, which is what allows them to fly. Once the body's construction is complete, they are implemented with an augmented cortex and nervous system, usually harvested from a lesser creature, such as a monkey, bird, pig, or feline. They are then given a set of programmed commands and are capable of performing simple tasks, such as copying text, fetching and carrying small items, or tirelessly singing the Emperor's praises with augmetic vocal cords. In the past, they have been outfitted with surveillance equipment and used for spy work, or been trained to carry small weapons. There have even been some cherubim in the past that were designed to be used by psychically gifted inquisitors as something of a psychic focus, taking on a role similar to a witch's familiar. Now don't get it twisted, the Imperium is pretty dark, and the further you get into this franchise, you're gonna start to realize they're just as evil as everybody else. But they're not lobotomizing babies evil. Even still, it's not just you. Even people within the Imperium find these things super creepy and off-putting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the cherubim's creators, the Adeptus Mechanicus. Who is the Adeptus Mechanicus? In Space Marine 2, you're going to encounter a lot of dudes walking around in red robes carrying some pretty sick-looking axes. So what are these guys all about? Well, they're members of a faction known as the Adeptus Mechanicus, also commonly called the Machine Cult or the Tech Priests of Mars. They are easily one of the most powerful human organizations in existence, and it is they who are responsible for maintaining and producing all of the Imperium's advanced technology. Be it the weapons and armor they use, industrial machinery, servitors, or even their many classes of void ship. When it comes to religion, most of mankind is part of the imperial cult that preaches that the Emperor is the one true god of humanity. The machine cult, on the other hand, worships him as only part of a sacred trinity. The trinity consists of the machine god, the embodiment and bestower of all knowledge and technology in the universe, the motive force, the invisible energy that gives life to both mechanical machines and organic ones in the form of living creatures, and the Omnissiah, the Emperor, who the machine cult believes is the physical avatar of the machine god. The Mechanicus believes that machines are sacred, and thus its members seek to become closer to machines by systematically removing all of their organic components and replacing them with mechanical augmetics. Many lower-ranked individuals within the cult may still be early in this process, having only received a single augmetic, like an augmetic eye or limb, whereas some high-ranking magi are truly horrifying to look upon, Almost every trace of their human ancestry has been completely discarded, save for a few organs preserved deep within their core. The Mechanicus views knowledge as sacred, and thus all of its members are on what they call the quest for knowledge. Throughout their life, they will be continuously seeking out lost data, artifacts, and any information not currently known to humanity, so that by the time they die, they can contribute all of their findings to the sum total of humanity's knowledge. Although the Adeptus Mechanicus is without a doubt part of the Imperium, it's honestly better to think of them like an allied nation, as they're given more independence than any other human faction. This is aggressively oversimplifying it, but the main reason for this is that they control all of mankind's forge worlds, where they produce all of the species' machines. Both factions are completely reliant upon each other to continue to exist. The Imperium needs their technology, and the Mechanicus needs their armies. If one side was to declare their independence, both would surely end up being swallowed by mankind's legions of enemies. Because the Mechanicus has so much power, and they routinely refuse to acknowledge the Imperium's authority, this leads to them pretty frequently throwing their weight around. If there's something they want to do or a place they want to go, they're just gonna do it, with or without the Imperium's permission. Which, as you'll see later in the game, it definitely leads to a bunch of headaches for members of the Imperium. The machine cult is not a monolith, and though they are often portrayed as being rigidly adherent to their dogmatic creeds, certain groups within the Mechanicus often shift back and forth across the spectrum of the Puritan and the Radical. Individuals that deviate too far from their teachings and start delving into things the machine cult has labeled as forbidden may see themselves executed or excommunicated. Such crimes often include the studying or working with any machine created by an alien, utilizing machinery tainted by chaos, experimenting with artificial intelligence, or committing the dreaded sin of innovation. Who is the Astra Militarum? Now, if you're brand new to Warhammer, I'll forgive you for thinking that these Space Marines are the primary fighting force within the Imperium of Man, but that title actually belongs to the Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard, and if I'm being honest with you, it's not even a close comparison. There are an estimated 1 million Space Marines in active service, spread out across 1,000 chapters. Meanwhile, it is estimated that there are over 30 trillion men and women actively serving within the Guard. That's 30 million guardsmen for every single Space Marine, just to put things in perspective. In the grimdark future, the one resource that humanity is never lacking is human bodies. For every guardsman killed, 10 more stand ready to take his place. The Imperial Guard relies on overwhelming numbers, legions of tanks, and an endless array of devastating artillery to annihilate anything that gets in their way, as well as an endless legion of foot-pounding guardsmen ready to march right into the meat grinder to destroy the enemies of mankind in grueling wars of attrition. Just like how there are lots of different Space Marine chapters, all with their own unique aesthetics, personality, and combat tactics, so too are there tons of unique Guard regiments, each pulled from one of the Imperium's worlds. There's the Mordian Iron Guard, the Catachan Jungle Fighters, the Vostroyan Firstborn, the Death Corps of Krieg, and the Elysian Drop Troops, just to name a few. The regiment that we interact with in Space Marine 2 are the Cadian Shock Troops, hailing from the fortress world of Cadia that for thousands of years stood guard in front of the Eye of Terror as mankind's first line of defense against incursions from the forces of chaos. As a fortress world, the Cadian military complex trains each and every man, woman, and child to defend their world. Everyone is expected to serve, and at age 14, they will be inducted into the White Shields, the Cadian Youth Army, before later going to join the Interior Guard when they come of age. Cadians have an honored yet bloody place in Imperial history, fighting a seemingly never-ending war whilst remaining unbroken and unbowed. However, during the Chaos Warmaster Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade, Cadia would end up getting destroyed. Now, despite the loss of their homeworld, the Cadians continue to serve the Emperor on battlefields across the galaxy, and as many say, the planet broke before the Guard did. The men and women of the Guard are easily some of the hardest individuals you will encounter in all of 40k. Each one has a neck like a tree trunk and is trained to kill you in 1,000 different ways. Many Warhammer veterans consider them to be the true heroes of the Imperium, as they're not gifted with all of the enhancements a Space Marine is, yet they fight on the front lines against the same enemies nonetheless. Further, Space Marines quite literally have the emotion of fear ripped out of them during their construction. The men and women of the Guard have no such luxury. They say that true courage is not the absence of fear, but it is to experience it in its entirety and rise above it. To the men and women of the Guard, there is no greater honor than dying in service to the Emperor of mankind. Okay, I think we've spent enough time talking about all of the protagonists in this game, so it's time to get a little bit spooky and start talking about all of the enemies you're going to face. What are the Tyranids? The Tyranids, also known as the Great Devourer, are one of, if not the single greatest threat currently facing all organic creatures living in the Milky Way galaxy. They are like a galaxy-spanning plague of locusts that consume everything in their path, stripping down entire planets to the microbial level, and leaving behind nothing but barren, empty rocks floating in the void. Their attacks are heralded by a disturbing phenomena known as the Shadow in the Warp, a veil of psychic darkness that emanates from their hive ships and blocks out astral communication, leaving their prey unable to call for help. This is the reason why the astropath in the game that Titus tried to use to send a message told him that it was nearly an impossible task and very dangerous. Now, as the attack begins, the sky is blotted out by trillions of spore pods that ferry down warrior organisms to the planet's surface that bog down the planet's defenses in a tidal wave of thrashing bodies, rending maws, and scything talons. With every subsequent wave of Tyranid reinforcements, their bioforms grow larger and more terrifying, until the last of the planet's resistances are utterly crushed. Once everything is good and dead, and horrifyingly, often before this point, their feeder organisms will begin the process of rendering down all organic substances on the planet into a gelatinous gruel known as biomass. This biomass will then be collected by all of the Tyranids and deposited into great oceans of gore. Once it's all in one place, all of the Tyranids on the surface will end up killing themselves by throwing their bodies into the ocean of biomass. You see, all of the Tyranids are made out of biomass, so by doing this, they don't have to worry about finding a way to get them all back up in orbit. Anyways, the next step is that giant proboscis-like appendages will descend from their hive ships and connect with enormous bioconstructs known as capillary towers. At this point, the entire planet's population and all of the Tyranids will be sucked up into their ships before they all move on to do the same thing to another planet. And fun fact, their ships aren't actually ships at all. They're another bioform, just one that is titanic in scale and evolved to exist in the void and ferry their troops across the galaxy. If these things tried to descend to the planet's surface, the gravity would end up crushing them. Anyways, biomass is the Tyranids' building blocks of life, as they're able to take it and mold it into whatever they could possibly want, whether that be swarms of warrior organisms, organic weapon adaptations, or even into new hive ships. Additionally, the DNA of every creature they encounter and consume is cataloged by the hive mind and used to produce ever more terrifying bioforms and weapon adaptations. They are quite literally the combined DNA of trillions of different species, the ultimate life forms that maintain the strengths of their prey while discarding all of their weaknesses. Although they may look like a horde of frenzied beasts, don't let their primal appearance fool you. The Tyranids are hyper-organized and all controlled by a single godlike collective intelligence known as the hive mind. In many respects, all of the Tyranid bioforms that you see in Space Marine 2 are technically part of the same organism. Their minds are all linked together through a psychic synaptic web of consciousness, and the hive mind is capable of simultaneously controlling countless Tyranid organisms across millions of battlefields. The most dangerous thing about the Tyranids is just how ridiculously adaptable they are. Their accelerated evolution allows them to change shape and unit loadout on the fly to counter anything the enemy could possibly throw at them. And their shared consciousness means that in a split second, trillions of organisms can alter their tactics mid-combat without the need for any kind of communication system. Although the different types of adaptations they can utilize are seemingly endless, all of their weaponry, including melee and firearms, are organic in nature, most of the time being technically a separate living creature from the organism it is attached to. Most of their guns fire living ammunition that burrows into the target's body, or fires waves of liquefying bioacid. Whenever the hive mind encounters resistance that it hadn't planned on, it will change things up. If hordes of Gaunts are proving ineffective against the enemy's massed anti-infantry firepower, it can switch to generating and deploying more armored lifeforms like Carnifexes. If the enemy is utilizing chemical or virus-based weaponry that is proving effective, The hive mind can dedicate resources to quickly altering the DNA of all new bioforms it produces that render them immune. And if the enemy seeks to hide away in fortified bastions, the hive mind will direct its armies to evolve into burrowing organisms that will attack from beneath. There is seemingly no end to what the hive mind is capable of doing or producing, and thus the only proven solution to fighting against them is to never rely on the same tactics for very long. The Imperium must be as adaptable as the hive mind itself, constantly willing to change up its strategy the moment the hive mind goes to counter them. Those rigid in their ways of warfare, individuals convinced of a particular style superiority, will quickly find themselves outmanned, outgunned, and joining their brothers in a pool of biomass. It's important to note that the Tyranids only showed up in our galaxy about 260 years ago, and in the grand scheme of the universe, that's barely even a blip in time. Most of humanity's enemies have been fighting against them for thousands of years, but already they've become a massive problem. With every new tyrannic war, they come back smarter, stronger, and more numerous than before. Many people believe that since they come from outside of the Milky Way, it's very likely that all of the Tyranids that we've encountered so far are nothing but the scouts, that they very well may have already consumed multiple other galaxies. Now, thankfully, as of right now, these remain just rumors, but even still, it's terrifying to think about. What are the different Tyranid bioforms? The Tyranid bioforms that we encounter in Space Marine 2 can be grouped into 3 categories: feeder, warrior, and synaptic creatures. The only feeder organisms in the game are rippers, swarming piranha-like creatures that begin the digesting process early by devouring dead bodies and converting them into biomass. The main frontline fighters include gaunts, which come in a melee version known as hormagaunts and a ranged variant known as termagaunts, as well as gargoyles, which are flying versions of gaunts that are used to corral enemies into isolated kill fields. Raveners are fast burrowing creatures with keen senses that are able to ambush their enemies and even track signals from box equipment to locate key personnel. Monstrous bioforms like the Carnifexes act like a living battering ram for the Tyranids that is capable of tearing apart vehicles and fortifications as if they were made of wet paper. Now, none of these creatures are really capable of thinking for themselves, as they're all controlled by the hive mind. But synaptic creatures that act like nodes for the hive mind's influence, like Tyranid warriors, zoanthropes, neurothropes, and hive tyrants, absolutely can think for themselves. Tyranid warriors are the lowest form of synaptic creature, and it's rumored that the hive mind created them by using Space Marine DNA. They are both adaptable fighters and field commanders for all of the lesser creatures. Zoanthropes and neurothropes, on the other hand, which are believed to have been created from Eldar DNA, are powerful psychic organisms capable of unleashing devastating warp energy, but in exchange have weak, atrophied bodies. Now, the Hive Tyrants serve as the Tyranids' battlefield generals, combining the adaptability of the warriors, the psychic powers of the Zoanthropes, and the strength of Carnifexes. Each Hive Tyrant is highly intelligent and controls all of the other organisms through the synaptic web. If killed, the Tyranids become disorganized and revert to a primitive state. They're still dangerous, but they're more like big animals at this point. But in Space Marine 2, when we see the Hive Tyrant die, all of the Tyranids died as well. This isn't normally how it works in the lore, but I'll admit it did make for a pretty dramatic in-game moment. Now, the one odd man out when it comes to their bioforms is the Lictor, which is not a synapse creature, but it's also hyper-intelligent. It's what we call an infiltrator organism that shows up on the planet before the hive fleets arrive, in order to gather vital intelligence and assassinate key military leader figures. So it's very likely that the Lictors we see in-game may have been on this planet for centuries or even millennia. However, the Tyranids are not the only threat facing players in Space Marine 2. But in order to understand the forces of chaos, we must first know about the warp. What is the warp? So if you're brand new to Warhammer 40k, it's important to know that this universe is split into 2 parallel universes, the realm of the physical and the realm of the immaterial, one made of tangible substance and the other intangible. We exist in the physical universe, and the immaterium, also known as the Sea of Souls or more commonly the warp, is sort of like our universe's dark reflection. It's a realm of pure psychic energy, created by the thoughts, ideas, and emotions of every creature that has ever or will ever live. Although this is a realm of all emotions, including good ones and bad ones, as we are currently living through an age of endless war, the emotions of fear, anger, treachery, and excess have become dominant. The warp is not only a dangerous and nightmarish dimension, but it's also quite literally full of demons, the home of the 4 demonic chaos gods, and it's also where human souls go when we die. No happy afterlife for people living in 40k. In many respects, you can think of the warp as 40k's version of hell. Now, despite the dangers, it is an unfortunate reality for mankind that we are completely dependent upon the warp to continue to exist as a spacefaring civilization. You see, the way that people within the Imperium are capable of achieving faster than light travel is by taking a shortcut through the warp. Although warp travel, as it is known, is incredibly dangerous and often inconsistent, on average, a ship traveling from one edge of the galaxy to the other via the warp would accomplish this journey in about 10 years, as detailed in the Rogue Trader RPG books. This means that barring some strange temporal phenomena, where sometimes a ship might end up going backwards or forwards in time due to the unknowable chaotic nature of the warp, on average, warp travel is about 10,000 times faster than the speed of light. Now, even if it's fast, such a journey will be fraught with danger, as the Sea of Souls tides are malevolent and some believe sentient. It's not uncommon for ships to get lost amidst its thrashing currents, swallowed by a warp storm, or consumed by demons if their Geller fields happen to fail. If anyone other than the mutants known as navigators, who are specifically trained for such tasks, was to try to look directly into the warp out of, say, one of their ship's portholes, they would most likely go insane. They would see the stuff of nightmares, images of swirling, elongated skeletal faces of the infinite dead, and their psyche would be flooded with themes and concepts the mortal mind was never meant to comprehend. It is a place where the laws of our universe have no sway. Time, physics, reality are nothing more than profane suggestions here. Also, all of the Chaos Space Marines, the Astartes that abandoned the Imperium and started following Chaos, exist in an area known as the Eye of Terror, which you can think of like a wound in reality where the warp and the physical universe overlap. They're constantly exposed to the warp's corrupting nature and worship the Chaos gods that live there. Now, this is why there was so much suspicion around Captain Titus, as he was able to hold the raw power of the warp in his bare hands in the first game, something that would have killed anyone else, or at bare minimum, subjected them to extreme side effects, such as rampant mutation or sudden onset insanity. We can see direct evidence on all of the Chaos Space Marines that are constantly exposed to the warp's energy. Just look at somebody like Imra. His face is all messed up and he's got a bird hand. That's Chaos corruption to a T. Yet Titus somehow showed not even a hint of such side effects. All I'm saying is that his brothers were 100% right to be suspicious. Now, another pretty major important factor about the warp is that this is where all of the psychers and sorcerers within this universe draw their power from. Whenever you see somebody in Warhammer channeling what appears to be magic, it's the warp's energy that they are conjuring. And the most famous sorcerers of all are the Sons of Magnus the Red, the Chaos Space Marines known as the Thousand Sons. What are the Thousand Sons? To face the Thousand Sons in combat is to risk not only your physical form, but also your sanity and soul, as they are unmatched when it comes to manipulating the perilous energies of the warp to reorder fate, mutate living flesh, and steal the will and wits of friend and foe alike. The power wielded by their sorcerers is limited only by their own sanity, as they continuously delve ever further into forbidden psychic disciplines to perfect their ruinous spellcraft. In addition to their ludicrous psychic abilities, the sorcerers of the Thousand Sons command thrall armies of Space Marine automatons known as Rubric Marines, hooting, gibbering flocks of bird-like beastmen known as Tzaangors, and hordes of deranged cultists pledged eternally to the will of their lords and their patron god, Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. When the Thousand Sons attack, they unleash sorcerous firestorms conjured with but a thought, and their bolters spew volleys of warp-tainted ammunition that rip through flesh and soul alike. Worse than the carnage they unleash is the unholy twisting of reality that follows in their wake. It is the fear that even should the Thousand Sons fail, even if their enemies emerge triumphant, those who battled against them can never be truly sure of victory, as illusion and trickery are second nature to these diabolical champions of Tzeentch. Those who have bested them are all too often nothing more than puppets, unknowingly serving the very foes they fight against. For over 100 centuries, the Thousand Sons have been a scourge to the Imperium of Man, their ruinous designs complex beyond mortal comprehension. If you're just getting into Warhammer 40k's lore and you're looking for a favorite chapter, warband, or legion, you honestly can't go wrong with the Thousand Sons. On the surface, they're a bunch of Egyptian-themed evil space wizards that are willing to do anything for power, and that is certainly true in their modern incarnation. However, the Thousand Sons are also one of the most tragic Space Marine groups, as they weren't always like this. Thousands of years ago, they were one of the most fiercely loyal legions to the Emperor and the Imperium. They were scientists and philosophers, individuals that viewed magic as a field of science, that humanity was only in the infancy of understanding. They knew the warp was dangerous, but they saw it as the next frontier. After mankind had established itself as the masters of the galaxy, our sister dimension was next in line to be brought into compliance. Their homeworld of Prospero was said to be something of a paradise, a sanctuary for psychically gifted people and a repository of all knowledge. Its capital city of Tisca was home to some of the largest libraries in the galaxy, where they cataloged the history of not only mankind, but the galaxy as a whole, preserving relics and records of every other species, including many that went extinct long before humanity took to the stars. Back then, Psykers were relatively rare amongst the Space Marines. However, the Thousand Sons were unique amongst the legions, as every single battle brother within their ranks possessed at least some form of psychic ability. From the very start, they faced accusations of witchcraft and heresy, even from fellow Space Marines, but they dismissed this as ignorance and continued their studies. Despite the distrust, their power on the battlefield was undeniable, with warriors capable of not only using bolters and blades, but summoning etheric firestorms to devastate entire armies. However, at the Council of Nicaea, the Emperor would declare that the Thousand Sons had gone too far, delving into heretical sorcery, and thus he banned all psychic powers from the Astartes legions. This decision devastated them, as they were created by him to be Psykers in the first place. It was like teaching a man to fly, only to end up clipping his wings. Unable to abandon their powers, they would continue using them in secret. When the Horus Heresy began, their Primarch, Magnus the Red, tried to warn the Emperor through astral projection, which directly violated his edict. This action ended up shattering the Emperor's psychic defense network that he had built around the Sol system, and allowed demons to invade the throne world. The Thousand Sons were labeled as traitors, and the Space Wolves Legion was sent to destroy them, their homeworld of Prospero, all of their cities and libraries, and kill millions of people. Facing annihilation, Magnus made a pact with Tzeentch to teleport all of his surviving sons off of Prospero and to a new planet called the Planet of the Sorcerers within the Eye of Terror. There they would remain for 10,000 years. From their perspective, they had been betrayed by the Imperium, so they would end up joining the traitors. Now, 10,000 years later, driven mad by the warp, the Thousand Sons still seek vengeance for Prospero, willing to fight endless wars and commit untold atrocities just to achieve it. What are Rubric Marines? When fighting against the Thousand Sons in Space Marine 2, many people new to the franchise may find it strange that whenever you kill one of them and go to perform an execution, there's nothing actually inside of their armor. It's just an explosion of energy that comes out when you tear off their helmets. So what exactly is going on here? Well, the vast majority of individuals within the Thousand Sons are what are known as Rubric Marines. These guys used to be a flesh and blood Space Marine just like their sorceress counterparts, but in a terrible accident had their bodies obliterated and their souls bound to their armor when Chief Librarian Isaac Armon cast a spell that he believed would cure them of their genetic curse known as the Flesh Change. This curse could sometimes cause them to randomly turn into a giant gibbering chaos spawn. And ironically, Armon's rubric worked, but not in the way he had intended. Although the soul of a former Space Marine is bound inside of a Rubric Marine, they're not really alive. They're unthinking, fearless, remorseless killing machines that have no need for food, drink, or rest. They are controlled by the Thousand Sons sorcerers. Lesser sorcerers may be able to control a group of 5 to 10 of the Rubric Marines, but some of the Thousand Sons exalted sorcerers can simultaneously control hundreds, if not thousands of them. They commonly wield what are known as Inferno bolt guns or warp flamers. The former is a bolter whose mass reactive shells are charged with baleful sorceress energy that not only shreds armor and flesh alike, but also the victim's soul. The flames produced by their flamers, on the other hand, aren't really flames in the way that we would think of them. It's a concentrated gout of searing warp energy that rapidly melts the target before violently fusing them back together in hideous configurations. As they don't have a physical body that can be injured, it's way more difficult to kill a Rubric Marine than a normal Space Marine, but they also aren't able to think for themselves, which is a huge weakness. The only thing that can really bring them down, however, is wholesale destruction, or their armor being ripped apart, which causes the ensorcelled dust within to escape. What are Tzaangors? The lesser forces of the Thousand Sons are made up of cultist, Imperial Guard deserters, and Tzaangors, a unique variant of Beastmen. Though they fill a similar role to the Bloodletters and Space Marine 1, Tzaangors aren't actually demons. Instead, they're mutants that are created by the whims of Tzeentch. They are the Thousand Sons shock troops and are released in chaotic hordes to weaken enemies before the Rubric Marines advance. Tzaangors are twisted by the warp into ideal warrior, combining bestial ferocity, avian agility, and human cunning. Their origins vary. Some result from dark experiments done by the Thousand Sons on captured slaves, whereas others emerge from ships caught in violent warp storms. And in rare cases, entire planets that have caught the attention of Tzeentch will begin to produce Tzaangor offspring, born twisted in the womb. These creatures will then rapidly grow to adulthood and often devour the defenders of their homeworld. Despite their savage nature, Tzaangors are highly intelligent and are capable of complex battle strategies. They are obsessed with seeking knowledge and will slaughter anyone who stands in their way, wielding massive blades, chainswords, and crude bolt pistol. The Thousand Sons believe that every abomination is a creation of Tzeentch, every twisted monstrosity a child of the Changer of Ways. Who is Tzeentch? In Warhammer 40k, the God Emperor is not the only deity in existence. For example, there are lesser deities for most of the galaxy's intelligent species. The Orcs worship Gork and Mork. The Eldar once had a full pantheon, but now only have a few remaining deities, such as Cain, the god of war, Isha, the goddess of healing, and Chegarak, the laughing god. However, all of them pale in comparison to the ruinous powers, the primordial truth of the universe, the Chaos Gods. In total, there are 4 deities in this Chaos pantheon: Khorne, the god of blood, Nurgle, the god of plagues, Slaanesh, the god of excess, and finally, the deity worshipped by the Thousand Sons, Tzeentch, the god of change, fate, sorcery, and knowledge. Tzeentch, also known as the Changer of Ways, is a near-omniscient being who crafts labyrinthian schemes spanning millennia, with countless variables and fates intertwined. Trying to understand just a portion of his motives will lead to madness. To him, all living beings are merely pawns in his cosmic game. His sacred number is 9, and this number frequently will appear wherever his influence is strong. As the embodiment of transformation, Tzeentch causes constant change in his followers, triggering mutations and unpredictable shifts in fortune. He attracts both psychers and sorcerers who are hungry for power, as well as disillusioned lowborns from Imperial society. All who follow the Changer of Ways seek knowledge and forbidden truths, receiving blessings that enhance their abilities while gradually eroding their sanity. Those who turn from the Imperium to serve Tzeentch believe that they are in control of their own destiny, not realizing that they have traded the leash of one master for a far more insidious one. What is a Helbrute? Although the forces of the Chaos Space Marines have access to dreadnoughts of their own, and many of them having been in service since the days of the Horus Heresy, they also have a relatively new construction that's similar in concept but far darker in actual practice. These abominations are known as Helbrutes. Much like their loyalist counterparts, the Helbrutes also serve as a life-supporting system for a critically injured Chaos Space Marine. But whereas dreadnoughts are revered by the loyalists, they are hated and feared by the Chaos Space Marines, as the system of a Helbrute is not only designed to keep them alive, but subject them to eternal torture, designed to transform the suffering of its unwilling inhabitant into unquenchable rage. In some Chaos warbands, entombment in a Helbrute is a terrible punishment for those who have failed a disgruntled warlord. While in the Thousand Sons, as they are somewhat lacking in the living Marine category, most of their Helbrutes are Chaos Space Marines from other warbands that the Thousand Sons tricked into entombment, normally by promising them access to their forbidden archives in order to grow into a more powerful sorcerer. The individual ends up realizing too late that during the mock trials the Thousand Sons have set up for them, their sorceress abilities are not actually being tested. Instead, they are being prepared to be put in a Helbrute. These individuals will be flensed and reduced with warp flames into a pulped mass of organs, the entire time being forced to remain conscious throughout the procedure, as the agony wrought by their transformation pleases the demonic essence permeating throughout the Helbrute. After he is sealed inside, the metal cage that holds the warrior's remains will begin to meld with his flesh, turning man and machine into a single psychotic organism. From this point forward, the Chaos Space Marine is bound to his maddening agony, and only by tearing savagely into the enemies of the sorcerer who controls him can the deranged warrior hope to find the sweet release of oblivion, or at the very least, find some momentary comfort via the anguish of all those it inflicts suffering upon. These wrathful monstrosities must be kept chained up at all times when not in use, as they're ludicrously dangerous, and when deployed are almost impossible to control. They are like a chaos wrecking ball that tears through the enemy ranks. They scream in agony as they fight, unleashing searing gouts of plasma that liquefy the foe, and pulverizing the enemy's champions with swinging arcs of their powerful limbs, reducing noble heroes to nothing more than a red smear in the dirt. What is a Heldrake? The Heldrakes are a type of thing known as a demon engine, a creation of the chaos version of the Adeptus Mechanicus known as the Dark Mechanicum. Now these things are created by fusing a demon with a machine, as demons cannot exist in the physical universe without a vessel to contain them. Demon engines come in a lot of different shapes and forms, each more terrifying than the last. But the Heldrakes are in a class all of their own. They're what happens when you take an airplane, seal it shut so its pilot cannot escape, and then subject the vehicle to a chaos ritual and combine it with a particularly deranged and wrathful demonic spirit. The whole process warps and twists the machine into a twisted airborne nightmare, wrought in the semblance of a dragon from ancient Terran myth. And don't worry, the pilot is still alive in there, but if you were able to see inside of a Heldrake, you would see something pretty horrifying. The pilot's remains have been strung up and spread throughout the entirety of the vessel, fused Full Metal Alchemist style to its mechanical components, with their brain and central nervous system welded into the cockpit. The Thousand Sons hold these monsters in high regard, as they are believed to be an embodiment of the fiery serpent that has long been the symbol of Tzeentch's servants. These things will shriek across the battlefield, unleashing gouts of searing warp fire that spread chaos through the ground forces, and whenever they detect their preferred prey, an enemy aircraft, they will take off after them like a bloodthirsty raptor, flying high into the air before diving straight down at ludicrous speeds, either slicing the aircraft in half by passing through it with their razor-sharp wings, or they'll jump on its back, bury their talons into its hull, and viciously rip it apart with their strong mechanical jaws, before hurling the flaming wreckage down to the battlefield below. Okay, so up until this point, we've talked about things in the beginning and middle of the game, and mostly only covered things that are at the very least revealed in all of the promotional material for Space Marine. But now we're gonna move into the game's final act, so if you don't want to know anything about the third planet or the secrets that are buried away under its surface, let alone the final boss in the game, then go ahead and click off this video now, and maybe make sure to check out some of those videos linked down in the description below if you want to know more. But okay, with that warning out of the way, let's get into it. What is a cemetery world? Within the Imperium are many different types of planets that are each dedicated to a very specific niche. Forge worlds are planet-sized manufactorums, dotted by endless factories that produce all of mankind's machines. Agri-worlds are planets solely dedicated to the production of food, with continent-sized animal pens and fields of crops that seem to stretch into infinity. Considering that the Imperium is plagued by never-ending war and the daily death toll across the galaxy is truly incalculable, another type of specialized world is required, a cemetery world, an entire planet dedicated to the dead. These worlds can contain labyrinthian graveyards that stretch across entire continents, while beneath the surface, vast catacombs stretch deep into the planet's crust. Every square inch of the world is dominated by countless tombs, mausoleums, crypts, and monuments to those who have died in the service of the God Emperor. Many are said to have an ever-present gloomy atmosphere. The skies are often overcast with thick dark clouds, and the winds howl as if in constant mourning. Some cemetery worlds are somewhat modest, containing endless fields of humble plots, that each contain the remains of a slain soldier. Other times, they're ludicrously bougie, such as the cemetery world of Thor, that is dominated by endless leagues of low rolling hills and dense woodlands. Beneath the eternal canopy of this planet exists the graves of the aristocracy of Escalon. Only the most wealthy are permitted to be buried here, whereas every other corpse that ends up on this planet will have its remains used to adorn and even construct the opulent tombs of their betters, a fate that many pilgrims actually aspire to. The dead are not the only occupants of a cemetery world, for the graves, tombs, shrines, and mausoleums all must be tended to lest they waste away entirely. And not to mention, somebody needs to build the countless new graves that are always under construction. These are societies that not only live amongst the dead, but are entirely devoted to their care. It's a little bit of a morbid subject, but cemetery worlds can actually end up bringing in quite a bit of business, and are often seen as being very lucrative. Billions of pilgrims will journey to these worlds each and every year to pay their respects, and during their visit, many locations have been designed specifically to cater to them. Also, in all of the stores on these planets can be found all manner of souvenirs, such as prayer scrolls and remembrance tokens. On one hand, this is because the Imperium has great reverence for martyrs, but on the other hand, it's kinda like the most dystopian, grimdark theme park you can possibly think of. What is a tomb world? So in the final act of the game, it's revealed that the cemetery world of Demirium that we're fighting on is actually a Necron tomb world. And despite this horrifying revelation, the Space Marines don't want to blow it up, as that would mean dishonoring the Imperium's martyrs that are buried there, which really serves as a great example for just how much reverence they have for the dead, as planets across the Imperium's history have been subjected to exterminatus for far lesser sins than literally housing millions, if not billions, of Xenos abominations. But what is a tomb world, and who are the Necrons? Well, the Necrons are one of the oldest and most powerful species the galaxy has ever seen. With technology so ancient and advanced, it appears like magic to lesser species. Now, 60 million years ago, they warred against the ancient ancestors of the Eldar, the Orcs, and a primogenitor race known as the Old Ones, during an event known as the War in Heaven, that concluded with all of the Necrons going to sleep in their tomb worlds and setting the clock to reawaken them 60 million years in the future. Over the last several centuries, one by one, these tomb worlds have started coming back online, their denizens rising from the grave to purge the living and reclaim the galaxy that rightfully belongs to them. Each tomb world contains legions of dormant Necron soldiers, their ruling hierarchy, and all manner of canoptic constructs that maintain the tombs while the Necrons sleep. Each tomb world is connected to a different Necron dynasty, all with their own different philosophies, culture, and ambition. The Imperium has no idea how many tomb worlds are still out there, and the most horrifying thing of all is that in most cases, one would have no idea that their home world is a tomb world until it's too late, and it starts to come online. The weapons, war gear, and machinery used by the Necrons is so advanced that the Imperium can barely even begin to piece together how it works. Worse still, whenever the Necrons are defeated, they and all of their equipment phase out of existence, teleporting back to their tomb world of origin, so none of the Imperial scientists are even able to study them to try to ascertain a weakness. The Necrons were not always the spooky undead robots that we know today. At one point, they were known as the Necron Tier, a flesh and blood species that would end up trading away their organic bodies for superior metal ones that could repair themselves. This was an event known as biotransference, and to do this, they made a deal with vampiric star gods known as the Catan that they had started worshipping as gods. However, after biotransference, the horrifying truth was revealed to them that they had been tricked. They no longer had souls because the Catan had eaten all of them. Now, they were just engram copies of consciousness installed into mechanical minds. Enraged, they turned against their own gods and shattered them, bound their fragments to their will, and turned them into devastating weapons of war. In battle, the Necrons are capable of literally dragging these guys out and throwing them out on the battlefield like Pokemon. The Necrons are absolutely crazy. They're also a proud and stubborn people that view all life forms as beneath them. Most of the dynasties don't really get along, and their royal courts are often plagued by infighting. However, in recent times, their supreme commander from the time of the War in Heaven, the Silent King, has returned to the galaxy, hoping to unite his people once again. Now, a united Necron front where all of the Tomb Worlds reawaken simultaneously would be an apocalyptic event unlike anything the Imperium has ever seen. And though I don't think this is actually going to happen in 40k's lore for many years, as there's still many ruling Necron figures that don't exactly like the Silent King, like Imhotep the Stormlord, I am at least willing to put money down that their reveal in Space Marine 2 means that they will almost certainly be the main antagonist in Space Marine 3. Something that I cannot put into words how excited I am for, because these guys are easily my favorite species in all of 40k. What is a Lord of Change? Okay, we've got one last thing to talk about in this video, a big-ass bird during the final boss fight of the game. Within a portion of the warp known as the Realm of Chaos are a multitude of different types and classifications of demons that exist within a hierarchy of power. At the very top, we have what are known as greater demons, the lords and generals of the Chaos gods, each one said to be a fragment of their patron deity and a direct reflection of their will and personality. The Lords of Change are the greater demons of Tzeentch that serve not only as his most exalted generals, but potent agents of chaos that, at his command, spread anarchy, mutation, and disruption across reality. Most Lords of Change take on a distinctive avian appearance, with brightly colored feathers and bird-like heads. Though as fickle of a god as Tzeentch is, and being obsessed with change, there have been many different variants documented across the millennia. Although each and every Lord of Change is a towering and fearsome melee combatant, their real power lies in their absolute mastery of sorcery. They can bend and reshape reality to their will, call down devastating comets of raw warp energy, and manipulate the minds of all those around them. Trickery, illusion, and deception are the Lord of Change's bread and butter. They have a deep and complex understanding of the true nature of fate, destiny, and time, and are often the center focus of complex, far-reaching schemes that can span millennia, manipulating individuals, planets, and even entire star systems to further their patron god's inscrutable goals. They are driven by a compulsion to redirect the predictable course of history and set it upon new and unexpected paths. They delight in dashing the hopes of the ambitious while raising penniless nobodies to the pinnacles of power. The Lords of Change also have a deep hatred for the entrappings of comfort, stability, and familiarity, and desire nothing more than to see worlds afflicted by such conditions broken and made anew. Sometimes their plots are subtle and not readily apparent, whereas other times, change can be sudden and violent. With the flick of a finger, a Lord of Change can engulf a score of warriors in flickering warp flames, inflicting upon them a fate that is as unpredictable as it is deadly. With a single word, they can transform mighty heroes into gibbering piles of mutated spawn flesh. I'm gonna be honest with you, I have mixed feelings on seeing a Lord of Change be depicted in this game as basically a giant monster for us to fight, as these are entities that measure their IQ in the billions and have existed since before time began. Now, I understand that this is a video game and Imra is the main antagonist, and since the Thousand Sons were chosen as the primary Chaos faction that we face, a Lord of Change kind of fits the bill as a big, towering, larger-than-life threat. But under normal circumstances in the lore, a greater demon is so much more than just a big beastie. Across space and time, many of them have been worshipped as deities in their own right, and have galaxy-spanning cults dedicated to their service. I personally would have liked it a lot more if they built up this particular Lord of Change a bit, maybe gave us some insight into his backstory, as even though Imra is a really cool villain who has a pretty sick design, in 40k's lore, a Space Marine, even an esteemed sorcerer of the Thousand Sons, it doesn't come anywhere close to a greater demon in terms of power or influence. I should clarify that this isn't really a complaint. I understand at the end of the day, Space Marine 2 is a video game that's meant to be fun, not a comprehensive lore deep dive. That's the purpose of videos like this one. I just bring all this up so if you're brand new to 40k, that you have more of an appreciation for just how badass the Big Bird Man actually is. My nerdy grumblings aside, I actually loved getting to see these dudes depicted in game and was super happy that the Thousand Sons and the forces of Tzeentch finally got shown some much needed love in 40k media. I love Nurgle too, but I'm getting kinda sick of him being the main antagonist in every 40k game. And there we go. That was all of the questions from Space Marine 2 that I figured should be answered to give you more context on everything that you'll experience in the game. Sometimes it's difficult to put yourself in the position of a newcomer that's experiencing this franchise for the first time when you've been entrenched in the lore for as long as I have. So maybe there are some things I forgot to mention or skimmed over that you're still confused on. So let me know all of your thoughts, comments, questions, and ideas for future videos down in the comment section below. I try to spend at least an hour a day in there interacting with everybody and answering as many questions as I can. I truly will never understand why some YouTubers don't hang out in their comment section, as talking with a bunch of like-minded people that are all nerding out about the same thing that you're interested in is easily the best part of being a YouTuber. But anyways, that's just me rambling. Big thanks to everybody who supports the work that I do, and I will catch you all in the next one.